Okay, I hit the wrong button. uh, you must live in the state that elects you. Okay, so let's run through it now. 'Cause I was distracted by the unexpected uh, interruption. To be qualified to be a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, you have to be at least 25 years of age on the day that you are sworn in. You have to have been a citizen for 7 years on the date you're sworn in, and you must have residence in the state that you serve. You cannot serve Louisiana in the House of Representatives and live over in Biloxi in Mississippi. All right. Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3. Representatives and, by the way, uh, when I accidentally stopped that video a few moments ago, it was almost up to the 1 hour mark. So we're going to start a new video lecture right now, and it will be, I think, number 7. Let me double check, please. Yes, I hit the button incorrectly. That was video 6. We are now on video 7. Okay. All right. Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3. Representatives, that's members of the U.S. House of Representatives, and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the individual states, because we know that that word several really means individual, shall be apportioned among the individual states which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians and not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. Now, that sentence in your copy of the Constitution is probably in bold, or it's underlined, or it's in italics, or it's in parentheses. Somehow, it lets you know that this is a special sentence. And what makes this sentence special is it no longer works. It's still in the Constitution, but it has been replaced by another later part of the Constitution. And the most notable part of this sentence that's no longer is in effect is the 3/5 rule. Remember, we said that uh, slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person for representative purposes. Now, and the 3/5 rule was in effect up until the end of the Civil War. But the Civil War killed slavery in the United States. And as a result, when it killed slavery, it also killed the 3/5 rule, right? Uh, African Americans were free and they had equal rights. They had the if a whatever rights a white man had, the black man also had that same right. So uh, the 3/5 rule was dead. That's why that sentence it mentions it says shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons. In other words, a free person is counted as a whole person, including those bound to service. There's that term. They instead of saying slavery, they say bound to a term of service for a number of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. So the 3/5 rule is dead, but it's in the Constitution. In order to get it out of the Constitution, well, I don't know what you would do to erase it. It's never been happened. It's never happened. You get rid of it by superseding it with future amendments. All right, now, but only that one sentence is no longer in effect. The rest of the section Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3 is in effect because it says the actual enumeration. Now, what the heck is an enumeration? That's a fancy word for counting. What they're talking about is the census here, because that's what the census does, isn't it? It counts Americans. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years, in such manner as they shall by law direct. Okay, we've sort of mentioned this earlier. Once the Congress met for the first time in 1789, they had 3 years to conduct the first census. And so they chose the year 1790 as the year in which that first census would be conducted. And then subsequent censi, I don't know what the plural of census is, but subsequent enumerations would take place every 10 years after that first one. All right, let me read it again. The actual counting shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States, and within uh, in every term of 10 years after that, in such a manner as they shall by law direct. The Congress makes the rules for conducting the census. What that means, in such a manner as they is the Congress, as shall by law direct. And over the years, the information asked for on the census has changed. At one time, basically, they asked for your name, right? A little bit more than that, and now they ask for all kinds of stuff. You know, they ask how many bathrooms you have and how many cars you have and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. But they can do it legally because the Constitution says that the census can be conducted in such manner as the Congress shall by law direct. So they could ask you anything. The number of representatives, the number of members of the United States House of Representatives shall not exceed one for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least one representative. You're back then, you got one U.S. representative for every 30,000 people who lived in your state. What if you had fewer than 30,000? You still got one representative. Uh, States have to have at least one. They cannot have zero representatives. Got to have at least one. And each state shall have at least one representative, and until such counting shall be made, and then it lists remember the Constitution was ratified in 1788. The first Congress met in 1789. The first census was not conducted until 1790. So, how did they know how many U.S. representatives each state was going to get if that first census had not been conducted yet? And that's a fair question to ask. Well, it's a rather easy answer if you know your history. They didn't need the census. Remember, there were only 4 million people in the United States in 1790. And most states knew exactly how many people lived in their state. And so, using that data, the writers of the Constitution decided how many U.S. representatives each state would get prior to the conducting of that first census. And so here's a list of the states and how many U.S. representatives each state would have. And until such counting shall be made, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to choose 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, and Georgia 3. Now, I am not going to require you to remember how many U.S. representatives each state got. Okay? What I do want you to know is that prior to the first census, using data that was already available in the individual states, the members of the Constitutional Convention determined how many U.S. representatives each state would have. And oddly enough, they were pretty close. All right. They were really, really close. And of course, once that first census was conducted and they had real, reliable numbers, then adjustments were made. Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 4. When vacancies happen in the representation from any state, the executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. All right. And what happens if one of your U.S. representatives uh, retires retires early, or he dies, or he's killed, or he's found guilty in an impeachment trial and he's forced to resign? Okay. Doesn't matter what the reason is. Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 4 talks about vacancies in the House. How do you fill them? That's the question. Excuse me. It says that the executive authority thereof, the executive authority of the state. What's the executive authority? It's the governor, right? So the governor of that state where the vacancy occurs shall issue writs of election, announce, shall announce an election for to fill such vacancy. All right. It's like I said, when you read it in the original language, it sounds very confusing and very intimidating. But when you put it into modern language, it sort of eases the stress, doesn't it? So let's read that now in modern language. When vacancies of any kind, for whatever the reason, occur in the representation from a state, the governor of that state shall announce a special election to fill that vacancy. Paragraph 5 says the House of Representatives shall choose their Speaker and other officers and shall have the sole power of impeachment. All right, we're talking now about the job duties. This is not a complete list, all right, but what are some of the duties of the House of Representatives? Well, first of all, the House of Representatives chooses their own officers. The president doesn't choose them. The people, they don't choose. The courts don't choose it. The members of the House of Representatives choose their own officers. They elect them. And included in those officers is the office of the Speaker of the House of Representatives. The Speaker of the House of Representatives is the presiding officer of the House of Representatives. Uh, Congressman Nancy Pelosi from California is the present day Speaker of the House of Representatives. She is the person up in front, right? Uh, with the gavel in her hand, and she controls the day to day operations of the House of Representatives. She has a huge role in determining what potential legislation even gets to the floor of the House of Representatives. Speaker of the House is a very powerful political position in the United States government. As a matter of fact, if the president and the vice president die at the same time, Now, if just the president dies, the vice president becomes president, right? Sure. But what happens if they're on the same plane and the plane crashes and they're both killed at the same time? Who becomes president? It's the Speaker of the House. So uh, it's a very important position. Who chooses the Speaker of the House? It's the members of the House of Representatives. Now, there are other officers in addition to the Speaker of the House. There are committee chairmen and things like that. Those people are also voted on by the House of Representatives. And then paragraph 5 ends by saying the House shall have the sole power of impeachment. Only the House of Representatives can impeach. Now, let's talk about impeachment for just a moment, because many Americans think that they know all about impeachment and they don't. All right. All right. When a federal official is accused of a crime of some kind, right? The Congress has the option to impeach that person. Now, the impeachment process in Congress, to be specific, in the House of Representatives, is very similar to the process in the civilian courts that's called the grand jury. All right, let me explain the grand jury first, and it might make it a little easier to understand uh, the impeachment process. Okay, you have been accused of a crime. You've been arrested. You've been put in jail. You've been charged with a crime. The first step is your case will go before a grand jury. A grand jury, the only job of the grand jury is to determine if enough evidence exists to send your case to trial. Now, let me say that again because this is unbelievably important. The only job of a grand jury is to look at the evidence in your case and hiccups and determine if enough evidence exists to send your case to trial. And if there is enough evidence, they do something to you that's called indictment. 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 You are indicted. Now, if there's not enough evidence to indict you, they turn you loose. Now, grand juries do not determine guilt or innocence. Let me say this again. The only thing that a grand jury does is determine if enough evidence exists to send your case to trial. All right, now let's go to the House of Representatives. Only the House of Representatives acts as a grand jury in impeachment cases. A person is accused of a crime. The House of Representatives will hear the evidence, and then the House of Representatives will determine if enough evidence exists to send that person's case to trial. By the way, who conducts the trial? It's the U.S. Senate. The House of Representatives determines if enough evidence exists to send your case to trial. Now, when the grand jury was looking at it, if enough evidence existed to send your case to trial, you were indicted. But in the U.S. House of Representatives, if enough evidence exists to send your case to trial, you are impeached. Now, many people think that that the impeachment process determines guilt or innocence. No. Just as the grand jury process does not determine guilty or innocent, neither does the House of Representatives impeachment process. For example, Bill Clinton was impeached, but he was not found guilty in the Senate. Donald Trump was impeached, but he was not found guilty in the Senate. You got to have both things happen in order to be guilty. You got to be impeached in the House. You got to be found guilty in the Senate. All right. Only the House can impeach. Article 1, Section 3, Paragraph 1 now turns to a discussion of the U.S. Senate. All right. Article 1, Section 3, Paragraph 1 begins to talk about the Senate. It says, the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof, for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. All right, let's break that one down into modern language. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. But this next little phrase no longer works. It says, chosen by the legislature thereof. There was a time in the United States when United States senators were not chosen by the people. They were chosen by the legislatures of the individual states. And that was in place until the 17th Amendment was ratified in the early 20th century. Now, we, the people, elect U.S. senators, just like we, the people, elect members of the House of Representatives. But it's not always been like that. For the longest time, members of the U.S. Senate were elected by their state legislature. For 6 years, okay, that's the term of the U.S. Senator, and each senator shall have 1 vote. Now, there are 2, each state has 2 senators. Remember, the Great Compromise said that membership in the U.S. House of Representatives would be based on a state's population, but membership in the United States Senate would be based on equality. Every state would have the same number of U.S. senators, and the number that was decided on was 2. So let's read the whole thing. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof, and we know that no longer works. For 6 years, that still works, and each senator shall have 1 vote. Each of the 2 senators, they don't have to agree. If they disagree, that's okay. They can vote their conscience. One guy can vote yes, and the other one can vote no, and it's absolutely constitutional. Article 1, Section 3, Paragraph 2. Yes. Immediately after they shall be assembled in consequence of the first election, they shall be divided as equally as may be into 3 classes. The seats of the senators of the first class shall be vacated at the expiration of the second year, of the second class at the expiration of the 4th year, and of the third class at the expiration of the 6th year, so that 1/3 may be chosen every second year. And if vacancies happen by resignation or otherwise during the recess of the legislature of any state, the executive thereof may make temporary appointments until the next meeting of the legislature, which shall then fill such vacancies. And y'all excuse me for 1 second. I'm in the kitchen. I'm walking over to the refrigerator to get myself some water. I'll be right back. Okay. I brought some of this water into class several years ago. One of my students said, "You got a lot of nerve bringing wine into class." I said, "No, no, 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 no. It's San Pellegrino. Huh? Water, just bubbly water." Okay. Article 1, Section 3, Paragraph 2 sounds complicated. It's one of these things that, once again, it sounds complicated, and it's not nearly as complicated as it sounds. So let's break this down. Immediately after they shall have been assembled in consequence of the first election. So this is talking about the election that took place in 1788 that chose where the legislatures of the 13 states chose the two people who would serve as U.S. Senator from their state. Okay. Immediately after they shall be assembled, who's they? It's the Senate. Immediately after the Senate shall be assembled in consequence of the first election, the Senate shall be divided as equally as may be into three groups. And the Constitution refers to these three groups as the first class and the second class and the third class. All right. The seats of the senators of the first class shall be vacated at the expiration of the second year. In other words, those senators who are unfortunate enough to be in the first class, even though the normal term of office for a senator is 6 years, they only get to serve 2. At the end of that second time, at the end of that second year, they have to be re-elected if they want to stay in the U.S. Senate. Or the second class, the fourth year. So what we have is the first class is going to serve for 2 years and they're gone, unless their legislature sends them back. The senators of the second class serve for 4 years and then they're gone, unless the legislature wants to send them back. Now, if you're in the third class, you're fortunate because the term of a senator is 6 years and you get to serve 6 years. Now, what that means, the reason that this is done is to provide turnover in the U.S. Senate. Every 2 years, 1/3 of all the U.S. senators have to run for re-election. And what that means is there's always a group of veteran United States senators remaining behind who know how the process of the Senate works. And I think that's a pretty clever way to do it. Now, this only happened at the very beginning as a result of that very first election. After that, all U.S. senators ever since then have served for their full 6-year term. Now, today we have 50 states, which means that we have 100 senators. And it's rather easy to divide the Senate into 3 equal, or what does it say? Be divided as equally as may be, as equally as possible. So, uh, one class has 33, another class has 33, and the third class has 34. And that's about as equal as it's possible to get. And if vacancies happen by resignation or otherwise, vacancies happen because somebody resigns or for any other reason, doesn't matter what the reason is. They die, they resign, they get killed, they are found guilty in an impeachment trial. What? It doesn't matter what the reason. If there is a vacancy, here's what happens. If it happens during the recess of the legislature. Now remember who elects in the old days, who elected the U.S. senators? It was the legislatures of the state. So here's the scenario. The legislature is on vacation. The Constitution says they're on recess. Right? They're on vacation. They're not there. And there's a vacancy. What happens? They're not there to fill the vacancy themselves. So what happens? It says that the executive thereof, the governor of the state, may make temporary appointments until the next meeting of the legislature, shall then fill such vacancies. So the governor has the authority under the U.S. Constitution to fill temporarily that vacancy. Then, when the state legislature gets back from vacation, they can either say, oh, yeah, the governor made a great choice. We're going to let him remain U.S. Senator. Or if they don't like the governor's choice, they can elect someone that they like. Let's read that again. If vacancies happen by resignation or otherwise, during the recess of the legislature of any state, the governor of that state may make temporary appointments until the next meeting of the legislature, which shall then fill such vacancies. Or not, right? They can either keep the guy on or they can choose a new person. It's up to them. Either is equally constitutional. Article 1, Section 3, Paragraph 3. No person shall be a senator. Okay, here are the qualifications to be a senator. No person shall be a senator who shall not have attained to the age of 30 years and been 9 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state for which he shall be chosen. So, just as there were 3 areas of qualification for the House of Representatives, there are 3 areas of qualification for the U.S. Senate. You've got to be at least 30 years old. And once again, you got to be 30 years old the day that you're sworn in. You can be 29 when you run. You can even be 29 when you're elected. But you got to be 30 when you raise your hand and take the oath of office. Also, you have to have been 9 years a citizen of the United States. So once again, you can be born in another country, come to the United States, become what we call a naturalized citizen, and then 9 years from that date, you qualify under the residency requirement to be a U.S. Senator. And once again, you've got to live in the state that sends you to the Senate. I'm so sorry about this runny nose. I know it's disgusting, but there's nothing I can do about it. Gravity is in control. Article 1, Section 3, Paragraph 4 talks about the Vice President. The Vice President of the United States shall be President of the Senate, but shall have no vote unless they be equally divided. All right. Let's go back to the House. What is the title of the presiding officer of the House of Representatives? It is the Speaker of the House. And the Speaker of the House is actually a member of the House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi, I mentioned, was a congresswoman from the state of California. Now, that's not the case in the Senate. There is an office called the President of the Senate. And that person is the presiding officer of the Senate in a similar fashion to how the Speaker of the House is the presiding officer of the House of Representatives, with some differences. The President of the Senate is not a senator. Far from it. He is the Vice President of the United States. So, because he's not a U.S. senator, he normally cannot vote. Now, he is in charge of the Senate on a day-to-day basis. Remember, he's the guy who says, okay, it's your turn to talk. You've talked long enough. You need to sit down and let somebody else. So he's in charge of the mechanics of the day-to-day operation of the Senate, but he is not a senator. He is the Vice President of the United States. And because he is not a senator, he cannot vote, except in special circumstances. If there is a tie when the vote is called, the Vice President can vote to break the tie. All right, so let's read it again. The Vice President of the United States shall be President of the Senate, but shall have no vote unless the Senate is equally divided, unless the Senate is tied. Article 1, Section 3, Paragraph 5 says, the Senate shall choose their other officers. There are other officers. There are committee chairmen and things like that. Also, they'll choose a president pro tem in the absence of the vice president or when he shall exercise the office of president of the United States. All right, here's the scenario. The president of the Senate is the vice president of the United States. A lot of students have trouble figuring that out, but it's not that difficult. The presiding officer of the Senate is, his title is the president of the Senate, and that person is has another job, and his other job is he's vice president of the United States. But sometimes being vice president interferes with his job as president of the Senate. Right? The president has sent him on a special mission to China or something, and the vice president can't be two places at one time. He's in China. So who serves as the presiding officer of the Senate? Well, the title of that person is the president pro tem of the Senate. And that little Latin phrase pro tem means for the time being. In other words, temporarily. So the Senate elects their officers, the committee chairman, and all those things. And they also elect a president pro tem who will act for the vice president if the vice president is absent. Or and that will be a temporary job, right? The vice president is going to be back from China eventually, and he'll go back and he'll lead the Senate. But what happens if the vice president? What happens if, God forbid, the president dies? Who becomes the president? Well, it's the vice president. Uh, and back in the early parts of the country's history, if the vice president became president, the office of the vice president remained vacant until the next presidential election. So, who would remain as the president of the Senate? The president pro tem. The Senate shall choose their other officers, also a president pro tem, in the absence of the vice president, or when he shall exercise the office of the president of the United States. Article 1, Section 3, Paragraph 6. The Senate shall have the sole power to try impeachments. Okay, let's stop right there. Let me remind you who actually impeaches. It's the House of Representatives. What is impeachment, though? It is very simple. We try to make too much of this. Impeachment has nothing to do with innocence or guilt. Impeachment simply means that there is enough evidence to send that case to trial. And in this case, who conducts the trial? It is the U.S. Senate. It will be the U.S. Senate who will determine guilt or innocence. The Senate shall have the sole power to try impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, when sitting in an impeachment trial, they, the Senate, shall be on oath or affirmation. They will take a special oath. They promise to be fair and to be impartial, right? When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside. Now, who is the presiding officer of the Senate in non-presidential impeachment trials? It's the Vice President of the United States because he's the President of the Senate. So why do they change that when the president is on trial? Well, it's very simple. Uh, Consider this scenario. Let's say that the vice president, who is normally the president of the Senate and would be the presiding officer in a non-presidential impeachment trial, let's say that the vice president was willing to do anything to become president of the United States. If he's the presiding officer of a presidential impeachment trial, he can manipulate things, maybe, to have the president found guilty and kicked out of office. And if that happens, who becomes the president? Huh? It's the vice president. So, to avoid any hint of corruption, right, when the president of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court serves as the presiding officer. That happened with Kennedy. I'm sorry. That happened when Clinton was impeached, and that happened this past time when Trump was tried. Uh, Chief Justice John Roberts served as the presiding officer of the Senate during the trial. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of two-thirds of the members present. What does it take to find someone guilty in an impeachment trial? Very simple. Two-thirds of those who are there, not two-thirds of the whole Senate. What is the Senate has 100 members, and so two-thirds of that would be 67. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about two-thirds of those who are there. What if two guys are sick, really, really sick? It'll be two-thirds of 98. Paragraph 7 talks about the penalty of being found guilty in an impeachment trial in the Senate. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. All right. If a person, including the president, is found guilty in an impeachment trial, they must be removed from office. There is no choice. The Constitution says it very clearly. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than removal from office. But there's another punishment here. You're disqualified to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. In other words, you can never have another United States government job. You cannot be elected to the Senate. You can't be elected to the House. You can't even be a postman. All right. The mailman is a federal employee, isn't he? So you are banned from all federal employment. But if you're found guilty, losing your job is potentially just the beginning. Because it's not necessarily the end of your legal troubles. You can be indicted, tried, and convicted and punished for that crime. When Richard Nixon resigned from office, one of the reasons he resigned from office was to avoid being impeached. Richard Nixon was never impeached by the House of Representatives. The House was getting ready to impeach him. If Nixon had not resigned when he did, I'm sure, would have been impeached. And if he had been impeached by the House when the trial went to the Senate, I'm reasonably certain that he would have been found guilty over there. Now, they would have had to remove him from office. Nixon would have been liable for further prosecution in a civilian court for aiding and abetting the break in at the Watergate Hotel. And that's a felony. Right? So Nixon could have been tried and found guilty of that felony and literally been sent to jail. And he knew that. And so to avoid that, he resigned before he could be impeached by the House. And by resigning in time, he avoided all that other potential stuff. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than the removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, punishment according to the law. All right. Article 1, Section 4 talks about other congressional stuff. Times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. Right. Individual state legislatures have the authority and the responsibility to decide when congressional elections will be held, where congressional elections will be held, and how congressional elections will be held. That's the times, place, and manner. But the Congress of the United States reserves the right to change those decisions that are made by state legislatures if the Congress thinks that it's necessary. For example, back in the bad old days of racial segregation, back during the Jim Crow days when black Americans were really seriously marginalized. This didn't happen. I'm using this as a hypothetical. It is entirely possible that the state legislature, which was probably racist if it was a Southern legislature, could have made laws that made it really difficult for black Americans to vote in that state. And if that was the case, then Congress had the power to step in and change the election time, place, or manner, or two of the three, or all three of the three, if they felt that potential voters, black voters, were being discriminated against. The Congress may at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations, the regulations that were created by the legislatures of the states, with one exception. They cannot change the place of choosing U.S. senators. Now, back in 1789, where was the place where U.S. senators were chosen? It was in state legislatures, right? And so that couldn't be changed. It would be changed later, but it took an amendment to the Constitution to change it. The Congress shall assemble at least once in every year, and such meeting shall be on the first Monday in December, unless they shall by law appoint a different day. All right. It says that the Congress has to meet at least once a year. Now, there was a time when we were a small nation, when the Congress was not that big, when the Congress would only meet when it was necessary for it to meet. But the Constitution is very clear. They've got to meet at least once a year. Now we got 300 and almost 40 million American citizens, and the Congress basically stays in session all the time except for vacation. Such a meeting shall begin on the first day, on the first Monday in December, uh, unless they shall by law appoint a different day. That's been changed. That's been changed by constitutional amendment. In fact, it's the 20th Amendment. The 20th Amendment changes the day of the first meeting day of the Congress to January the 3rd. But for years, it was the first Monday in December. Article 1, Section 5, Paragraph 1. Each house, each chamber, in other words, the House and the Senate, shall be the judge of the election returns and qualifications of its own members. All right, let's stop right there. The House has the power to examine the election of its own members. The Senate has the power to examine the election of its own members. All right, let's read it again. Each house, each chamber, shall be the judge of the election returns and qualifications of its own members. Each chamber will be very sure, for example, to make sure that in the House, everybody is at least 25 years old, or in the Senate, they're at least 30 years old. In the House, that they've been a citizen for at least 7 years. In the Senate, that they've been a citizen for at least 9 years, and on and on and on. In other words, they want to make sure that the rules that are set out in the Constitution itself are being followed. And a majority of each shall constitute a quorum to do business. All right. This word quorum, Quorum. A lot of my students have a mental block about that word. I guess it's because it's an odd looking word. Quorum is not a complicated concept. A quorum fundamentally is the number of people who must be present before business can be conducted. Right? The number of people that must be present in order to conduct business. And in order to conduct business in the House and in the Senate requires a quorum of a majority. Now, what is a majority? It's one more than half. One more than half. If you got less than that, you cannot conduct business. It's just that simple. You don't have a quorum. But it says a smaller number may adjourn from day to day and be authorized to compel the attendance of absent members in such a manner and under such penalties as each chamber may provide. So, each chamber, let's assume that, let's talk about the Senate, because it's easy to figure out what the Senate quorum is. It's 51, right? One more than half. Let's say that only 50 people show up. Can't do business. Now, you can stand around and visit, drink coffee, and share pictures of the grandbabies. You can do all that kind of stuff. You can't do official business. So, what alternatives are available if the quorum is not there? Well, it says that each chamber can send out members to compel attendance. So, let's say that somebody's not there, and as a result of him not being there, they cannot achieve a quorum. What can you do legally? No. More important, what can you do constitutionally? You can literally go to that person's house, that U.S. Senator's house, and you can say, Jack, put on your pants. You got to go with us, and they got no choice. They better go with you because they are. If they don't, they are liable to penalties. All right, let's read the whole thing again. Each chamber shall be the judge of the election, returns, and qualification of his own members. In other words, the Senate can't judge the qualifications of the House. The House cannot judge the qualifications of the Senate. And a majority of each shall constitute a quorum to do business, but a smaller number, less than a quorum, right? A smaller number may adjourn from day to day and may be authorized to compel, to force the attendance of absent members in such manner and under such penalties as each chamber may provide. Paragraph 2 says each chamber may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish punish its members for disorderly behavior, and with the concurrence of 2/3, expel a member. The House can make its own rules as long as they're legal, right? You can't make a rule that says kill the guy next to you because murder is illegal, right? But as long as it's legal, they can make their own rules, determine the rules of its own proceedings, in other words, punish its members for disorderly behavior. If a member of the House or a member of the Senate, uh, well, let's pick something that's terrible. They kill somebody, right? Uh, the chamber of which they are a member can punish that member up to and including expelling him, kicking him out of either the Senate or the House of Representatives if the behavior is bad enough. It doesn't specify behavior, does it? It simply says disorderly behavior, which could really be anything. And with a concurrence of 2/3, expel a member. That's what it takes, 2/3. In the Senate, that would be 67. Paragraph 3, each chamber, each house, shall keep a journal of its proceedings and from time to time publish the same. By the way, that journal is called the Congressional Record. And with the exception of sensitive, secret national security related stuff, everything that goes on in the Congress is in that book. You can read it yourself. I don't know if they still print it on paper and ink. It might be just digital today, but it still exists. It's still called the Congressional Record. Accepting such parts as may, in their judgment, require secrecy. That's the national security thing I just mentioned. And the yeas and nays of the members of either chamber on any question shall, at the desire of 1/5 of those present, be entered on the journal. All right. Sounds complicated. It's not. I sure am glad I'm almost finished with this lecture. I am smothering. Okay, here we go. Today, in the House and in the Senate, they have electronic voting. All right. You punch the yes button, you punch the no button, and the votes are automatically recorded. Right. But back in the old days, before the technology existed to do that, the only way that you could really have an exact count of who voted for something and who voted against something was to literally have a roll call vote. Uh, the name of each member would be called, and they would stand up and they would announce how they voted. I vote yes, I vote no. And all it took back in those days to order what's called a roll call vote was a 1/5, the desire of 1/5 of the members of the chamber to have a roll call vote. That's all that means. Not nearly as complicated as it seems. And paragraph 4, neither chamber during the session of Congress shall, without the consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days. nor to any other place than that in which the two houses shall be sitting. Usually, the Senate and the House are busy at the same time. But what happens, for example, if the House wrapped its work up early while the Senate was still working? Could the House take a few days off? And the answer is yes. Uh, but if they want to take off more than uh, 3 days, they've got to have the permission of the chamber that still is working. And they can only work where they're supposed to be. They can only work in the Capitol building. For example, uh, some years ago, after they were having a 9/11 memorial service in New York, where the Twin Towers used to be. And a lot of the members of Congress were there. As a matter of fact, there were enough people there that they had a quorum. And the question becomes, could they have conducted business in New York? And the answer is no. Even though they had a quorum, they have to be in the Capitol in order to conduct business. It says, neither house, neither chamber during the session of Congress shall, without the consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days, nor to any other place than that in which the two houses shall be sitting. Okay. All right, that is all of. Did we say this is number 7? I don't want to get you confused. I don't want to confuse myself either. Let me find that real quick. Yes, that was lecture number 7. And I'm going to go to bed, and hopefully I'll be able to breathe for the rest of the night. I will see you soon. Bye bye.